arrests of independent journalists, former CNN anchor Don Lemon and Georgia Fort, for their coverage of an anti-ICE protest that erupted and interrupted a church service in St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, federal agents took them and two others into custody today at the direction of Attorney General Pam Bondi, who is calling their actions a coordinated attack. Now, the indictment alleged that they oppressed, threatened, and intimidated congregants and pastors as they reported on the demonstration. But Lemon and Fort say that they were just doing their jobs as journalists. That is something that Lemon made very clear in his live stream tonight.
In today's video, Abby Phillip and Adam Mockler unleashes on Pete's seat on Newsnight with Abby Phillip as a fiery debate erupts over the arrest of Don Lemon and Georgia Fort, press freedom, and the First Amendment. Abby Phillip presses hard, Adam Mockler brings the legal heat, and Pete's seat struggles to defend the crackdown as the argument turns into a full-blown clash over journalism and democracy. So let's dive in and watch how Abby Phillip and Adam Mockler unleashes on Pete's seat on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
A magistrate judge who says, I am going to issue the criminal complaint against 3 of the people who went into the church, but not the complaint against Don Lemon. Then DOJ says, well, let's appeal that up to the chief district court judge who issues this scathing letter saying, this is not even a thing you're asking me to do. I asked every other district court judge in this district, and they said they'd never even heard of it. You're rejected again. And then they get a grand jury to indict today. So it's on the 3rd try they come back with this indictment against Don Lemon. It is doomed, I'm telling you. It's the easiest prediction I've ever made.
And that appeals judge not only said, why are you coming to me with this, but also said 2 of the 5 protesters were not protesters at all. Instead, they were a journalist and his producer. There is no evidence that those 2 engaged in any criminal behavior or conspired to do so. Pete, the Trump administration is always pushing the envelope. But in this particular case, this is crossing a line. The Constitution is very clear. There is freedom of press in this nation, and that right is just as valid as all the others in the Constitution. Why are they doing this, and shouldn't more people be speaking out about it?
I know you save unpopular opinions for Table for Five, which everyone should watch on Saturday mornings, but I'm going to start with an unpopular opinion, and that is calling Don Lemon a journalist is like calling AOC a free market capitalist. He is an activist. Look at his YouTube page. Here's a couple of titles of recent videos. 1, this is how to deal with ICE goons. 2, the viral MAGA idiot. This is someone who is not a journalist. He is an activist.
Is it your position that anybody who expresses opinions is not a journalist?
When you zoom out, this situation is bigger than one loud protest or one polarizing media figure. Courts have long held that the First Amendment protects journalists even when they cover chaotic or unlawful events, as long as they are not directing the action. We saw that standard applied during civil unrest in places like Ferguson and Portland, where reporters were detained but later cleared because observing is not the same as participating. That distinction matters because erasing it gives room to label press. There's also a practical reality. Journalism today isn't limited to legacy newsrooms with corporate logos. Courts have repeatedly recognized freelancers, live streamers, and independent outlets as legitimate members of the press, especially as local news deserts grow. According to recent media studies, over half of US counties now have limited or no daily local news source, which means independent reporters often fill gaps traditional stations abandon. Going after people in that space sends a signal that access to protection depends on popularity, not function. And politically, history shows crackdowns on disliked voices rarely stay narrow. From the Pentagon Papers fight to post-9/11 surveillance battles, powers justified in extreme moments tend to expand. Once the standard becomes, "we think you're biased," every reporter who asks sharp questions is vulnerable, left or right. That chilling effect is why press freedom groups track arrests of journalists as a democracy indicator worldwide. You don't have to enjoy someone's commentary style to recognize that weakening protections today reshapes rules for everyone tomorrow.
Well, even
that
if
your
he
position?
is, even if you
No.
agree,
I mean,
hold on.
well, let's deal
Even
with
if
the accusation that you're making that he is not a
I think
journalist.
he
It's
shed the
important
veneer of being a
because
journalist a
because
long
we
time
have
ago.
in the press a lot of different kinds of journalists. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the New York Post, they've got editorial boards where people are expressing opinions all the time. They're not journalists?
I think that Don Lemon is not a journalist.
But why?
But
is
if
it because
you
he's
think,
expressing?
if you,
Is it because in his
listen,
view, in your view,
if
he's
you believe that
expressing
he
an
is,
opinion?
if you believe that he is a journalist,
But why?
I still think that he
Pete.
is wrong in this instance.
Pete,
If
but
you
you're
look
not
at the
saying
Times,
you're
he's a
not
journalist.
saying- you're not saying
I just
why.
don't. I think he's an activist.
Well, but you just don't is not a
listen to him
reason.
when he's in the church and he's cheering them on. And
He
he's
is-
saying,
he-
"This is what you
what did
do.
he
This
say?
is what you do.
What
You
did
have
he-
to make
how did he
people
cheer them on?
uncomfortable."
That was
He
his
cheered them
interpretation
on.
of what they were doing.
He was pointing out that people were scared and afraid and
That's
practically
observing. That's
taking
what
a
journalists
victory
do.
lap.
They observe.
No, he was cheering it on.
How is he cheering it on if he's pointing out what's
No,
happening
he
right
said
in
these
front of his
people are scared
face?
and afraid, and that's why
Were
you
they
come and
not?
protest.
He's
Were they not?
interpreting
He
what the
was
protesters
cheering
were
it
doing.
on.
How is he
It was a
cheering it on when
victory
he's
lap.
telling you what's happening?
Pete,
That's
did
part of what we
Did you
do.
see the parts where he was?
He also
hold
told
on.
them, I'm
Did you see the
happy
parts
that
where
you're
he
doing
was
this. I'm glad that you're doing
interviewing,
this.
where he was interviewing the parishioners? Did you see those parts?
Yeah, and I also saw when the pastor asked him to leave, and he refused to leave for 7 minutes.
I didn't see a single moment where Don Lemon conspired with the others to further this crime. He was there
He
reporting
knew
the
about
entire
it in
time.
advance.
So how did he further
He
that?
admitted that he knew about it.
That has
Do you
nothing to do with
realize
what I
that
said.
journalists are often
It does
told
not-
in
just
advance
knowing
about
about something
protests?
before it
That's what
happens
happens.
So if you know someone is going to be shot and killed and you go to cover it, you're not
Well,
complicit.
hold on. He said early on in the video that they were going to do some kind of protest. He was following along with them. Ellie, I mean, I'm curious in your professional opinion, just taking in all of this discussion, how do you think that all of this factors into, was he a journalist? Was he not? Can you just say that he's not a journalist because you don't like that he has an opinion? Does it matter if he was following them into something and he wasn't sure exactly what was going to transpire?
So the crucial legal line here is between journalist and participant, right? If you're a journalist, you can't get charged with this. If you cross the line into participant, then arguably you can. Now, I think with Don, look, you can say he's a biased journalist. Like, I will give you that. There's no question. But you can't say he's not a journalist because you think he's over the top or you disagree with his views any more than you can say, I don't know, is Tucker Carlson a journalist? I would say he is. He's biased as well. Clearly, Don is a journalist, but there's going to be some interesting cases. We saw some of this with January 6th because some of the people who went into the Capitol tried to defend themselves by saying, well, I was live streaming to my 43 followers. That makes me a journalist. Now, we don't know exactly where the line is, but by any construction, Don is a journalist and should get the protection.
And it was just recently that Vice President J.D. Vance was saying that Nick Shirley should win a Pulitzer. Was that journalism to you?
I don't think it was.
Okay.
I'm pretty consistent on this. I don't
Okay.
think that he is.
When it starts hinging on whether someone counts as a journalist, that's usually a sign the conversation is drifting away from the Constitution and into vibes. The Supreme Court has never created a licensing system for the press, and federal courts have repeatedly said the First Amendment protects the function of gathering and sharing information, not the job title, opinionated reporting, analysis, even sharp language doesn't cancel that protection, or most modern political media wouldn't qualify either today. There's also a long legal tradition allowing reporters to be present during tense, even unlawful events, as long as they're not directing or materially helping the action. Courts have thrown out cases where police tried to argue that proximity or prior knowledge alone made journalists participants. Otherwise, investigative reporting would collapse. Think about exposés where reporters know a stunt or protest is planned in advance. Knowledge is not conspiracy, and documenting reactions, including fear or chaos, is part of showing impact, not endorsing behavior. The slippery part is deciding journalism based on tone. Media scholars point out that the US press system has always included advocacy voices, from early partisan newspapers to modern cable hosts. We don't protect only the calm or neutral, we protect the act of informing the public. Once officials or commentators can downgrade someone to activist and strip protections, that tool won't stay aimed at one side. It becomes a pressure point that any administration can use when coverage gets uncomfortable.
Lemon and Fort approaching the pastor and largely surrounding him, They stood in close proximity to the pastor in an attempt to oppress and intimidate him and physically obstructed his freedom of movement while Lemon peppered him with questions to promote the operation's message. First of all, the pastor stood there and spoke to him as if he was being interviewed by a journalist. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is this seems to acknowledge that Don was asking questions. I don't know that standing next to someone in a gaggle, which is what that was, and asking them questions is oppressing and intimidating them.
Well, I think we did glaze over the events of what happened, and it was a very alarming thing for the First Amendment when it comes to freedom of religion. I mean, there were children who were getting screamed at and being told your parents are Nazis and they're going to burn in hell. So that event.
I think the question is
right. So I do want to address that.
Did Don and Fort do any of those things?
The question is he a protester or a journalist? And the indictment obviously suggested that he posted himself at the main door. He prevented people from exiting, but ultimately
No, it does not say that.
The indictment
says that protesters did that. It names the other people. It did not say that Don did that.
Look, I'm glad.
And by the way, if you or they want to make that claim, they would actually have to prove that. How are they going to prove that? That's up to them. That would be pretty evident,
the case is
right?
going to play out, but I do want to say I'm glad to hear that everyone is up in arms about journalism and freedom of the press, and I wish that we'd also heard this when James O'Keefe of Project Veritas was being raided by the FBI because he was investigating Ashley Biden. I wish we'd also heard this kind of outrage when the Blaze journalist Steve Baker was arrested for filming and reporting on January 6th. He was a legitimate journalist. So look, I think freedom of the press is extremely important, and I would like to see that same concern applied equally to both conservative and liberal journalists.
And I'm with that because I don't think if you're right, left, upwards, downwards, sideways, leaning, it doesn't matter to me. Even if this was a journalist I didn't personally know, a journalist who I would disagree with everything they said, I think now is the time for all journalists, regardless of what outlet you work for, regardless if you're a competitor. I love the fact that CNN put out a statement about this because I think every major outlet, Fox, NBC, all of them need to put out statements and draw a line. To me, part of the reason why we're in this moment is because of the capitulation by legacy media to Donald Trump. And it's like we have to be able to draw a line and say this is not okay, whether it happens to Don Lemon, whether it happens to a conservative journalist, a right-wing journalist. This is not okay.
What stands out is how quickly intimidation gets stretched to describe routine news gathering. In crowded news moments, reporters bunch up around sources all the time. It's literally called a press gaggle. Courts have generally looked for clear physical blocking or threats, not just proximity and persistent questions. If standing close while interviewing becomes criminal, that standard would sweep in courthouse steps, disaster scenes, and political stakeouts across the country, which is why judges usually demand very specific evidence. There's also the religious freedom angle, but the First Amendment protects both worship and press activity, and conflicts between rights don't automatically cancel one side. Legal scholars often point out that the remedy is narrow enforcement against actual disruptors, not broad charges that blur roles. Meanwhile, data from press freedom groups show journalist arrests at protests have risen in recent years, and many cases later fall apart because police reports lump observers in with participants during chaotic situations. The bigger issue is precedent. American media history is full of reporters covering groups they don't agree with, sometimes in tense emotional environments. The Pentagon Papers era, civil rights marches, even anti-war church demonstrations were all documented by journalist critics called biased at the time. Protections held because the alternative is viewpoint-based enforcement. Once tone or perceived sympathy becomes the test, officials get to decide which coverage is legitimate, and that's a power the Constitution was designed to keep out of government hands. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.